another source of tension going on in today's meeting was South Africa's stance on Israel and Hamas. Israel, in particular, is a contentious issue for these two nations. South Africa has taken on a real role in sort of as an ally to Israel and the Palestinians. Eddie, let's get reaction now from State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce. Tammy, thanks for coming on the show. Welcome back. So,
thank you.
You know, to this meeting, because I know that you were with the Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Capitol Hill. This came up yesterday in Congress in his testimony. Violent crime is a huge problem in South Africa, but less than 1% of the murder victims were farmers, and even some of those relatively rare murders were only about robberies. One farmer was murdered by his own staff over a salary dispute. Why is this such a big issue for President Trump?
Well, obviously, I take President Trump at his word. He's been very clear about his opinion about the violence in South Africa. The statistics you've noted come from apparently the South Africa Police Service. And I think that there's clearly, for the President of the United States, who's taken a very significant interest in the nature of what's happening around the world, cares about ending violence, cares about taking on issues that others have not taken on or not taken on seriously. You know, this is one of them. And the President of South Africa was in the White House because he also knows it's serious. And the numbers of murders, it gets difficult when you I don't want to diminish the percentage of murders or the nature of how many there are. The fact of the matter is we've seen the videos. The world knows of the violent crime issue in South Africa, and the president wants it to stop. And, of course, we have our refugee program now in which they've got credible arguments regarding the need for refugee status, and so we've let them in. And this is, I think, at least a meeting and a conversation that is public, that can hopefully change the dynamic, put South Africa in the spotlight so that they can take actions against those calling for the murder of white individuals, of Afrikaners. And then the biggest issue, I think, that shows you the attitude of the Ramaphosa government is the signing into law of a right for them to expropriate the properties of Afrikaners in the name of equity and effectively social justice. So that, of course, highlights the attitude that has been prevailing, and that's clearly has got to be confronted and stopped.
Yeah, that law was just signed into law. I guess the law could be signed into law a couple of months ago, but the government says it has not yet seized any land in this manner. Do you believe them when they say that?
Well, yeah, considering the nature of what's happening there and what our president has reported, the nature of the other reports regarding violence and attitudes, you know, we're going to take people not necessarily at their word in this case, but at what they do. And the action of a law like this speaks to the fact that Afrikaners are being targeted and in a completely unacceptable way. And, of course, laws then translate into attitudes. It gives other people permission or suggests to the population that certain kinds of people are bad and should be punished and their property should be taken. And that's only going to add to the attitudes that have contributed to this problem. So there's clearly a lot of issues that South Africa has to deal with. They're getting a reaction from President Trump. President Trump's confronting it, and it would be clearly in their best interest to be honest about it and to address it.
Yeah, the dramatic moment, of course, came when they played that video. You mentioned the fact that this leader of this sort of fringe opposition party in South Africa, a man who was expelled from Congress and has twice been convicted of hate speech. On this video, he says all sorts of awful, vile things about all the farmers should be killed, but he's not part of the South African government. Given the fact that this is a democracy, what do you expect the government to do to him? He's been convicted already twice of hate speech.
Well, at the same time, that's a reflection of an attitude that is there in public, is being said in public. And then when it's then matched by a government that passes a law targeting those same people for their property, this is the kind of combination that is of course, elicits violence, suggests that the person calling for violence against the same individuals is right when the government does one action, which is, again, saying, well, we have the right to take the property of these people, and without reason, essentially. So when you look at that action, it's difficult, and it's difficult to say that the government is not at least on the same plain or at least sympathetic when that's the kind of law they pass in the midst of that kind of hateful, violent rhetoric.
Listen, this was quite a meeting today in the Oval Office.
It was.
President Trump did not give up. He was like a dog with a bone on this issue. But isn't the bigger issue South Africa's very cozy relationship with Iran? They helped Iran ease the pain of the sanctions we imposed on them. South Africa is also aligned with China and Russia.
Right. And I have to tell you, Elizabeth, that tells you even more about the nature of the leadership of South Africa, but also that they went to the International Court of Justice to accuse Israel of genocide and not Hamas after October 7th. So you've got that dynamic, the assistance of the enemies of peace, the enemies of humanity, the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, Iran. That also speaks to the intent and the attitude of the leadership of this government. And what I love about President Trump, of the many things I do, is his willingness to be transparent, to be blunt. And I think even Ramaphosa had to have known what was going to happen. I don't know what he expected, but Americans appreciate this honesty, and the world should appreciate it as well, because too many times people have looked away. And now it's important to look at these issues in the totality when it comes to what other countries they support, like Iran, the laws that they pass, and then their weak condemnation of the rhetoric calling for mass murder. We have to look at this as a whole. South African citizens deserve better. Certainly the world deserves better. And these kinds of rogue attitudes have to be called out. And for President Trump to do it in the White House gives it a legitimacy that is important and serious, and hopefully will be taken to heart by Ramaphosa in particular.
You were on Capitol Hill all day yesterday with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who seemed to allude to those problematic alliances in his testimony yesterday. When he said, quote, "The United States has a right to prioritize people coming into our country on the basis of what's in the best interests of this country." He was talking about the Afrikaners being given what is now a very rare exception and allowance to come in when we are not allowing anybody in right now. But the point being, was he not signaling at the fact that South Africa's government has these very cozy relationships with what are basically our enemies across the globe?
Well, you know, when the issue regarding visas and people coming into the country was discussed, it was arranged so that there could be exceptions. This happens to be the first one. There may be more, of course. And this is a first one because you've got to apply based on a refugee status that can be proven and is legitimate. And that's what we've seen with these 59 South Africans. So I think what he's saying is that we can complain and talk about things happening in the world, but when we say we're going to take people not by their words but by their actions, that we hold up that standard as well. You can look at what the United States does. We do point out the problems, the serious problems in South Africa, and we're going to act on that. We can look at, and we all lament the issues of Russia and Ukraine and Gaza, but we are doing something about it. So this is what the world has got to be moving into, the new idea, as promised by Donald Trump, that we've got to handle these issues differently. And part of that is not just complaining or having meetings and talking about it, but taking action. And we've done that now in a number of ways, including in the South Africa case, talking with him in the Oval Office in a very public meeting, and in other ways with special envoys to create ceasefires and to hopefully stop wars. And with the Afrikaners, if they are genuinely having an issue, apply for asylum as refugees for this country, and if it is legitimate, we will let you in. And that's what we've decided to do here. So it's about acting on your values and your beliefs, and that's what we have with not only President Trump, certainly, but also with Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
All right, Tammy Bruce from the State Department, appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.